Well, staggering numbers. The U.S. budget deficit setting a new one-month record in June as spending outpaced revenue by more than $864 billion. This enormous jump in spending apparently due to the federal government's coronavirus response. Let's bring in Harvard University economics professor and former IMF chief economist Kenneth Rogoff. Kenneth, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, look, I mean, a $3 trillion deficit for the 12 months through June. I mean, spending at some point is going to have to be reined in. But when does that make sense?
Well, we're still in the teeth of the pandemic and this recession. I know some people in markets think there's a V-shaped recovery, but I'd like to see a lot stronger evidence of that before I even began to think about slowing down the stimulus. Worst recession since the Great Depression, at least. So now this is going to keep going, I'd say, for a lot longer.
Yeah, well, obviously the pandemic is going on much longer than anyone anticipated. I want to bring in these comments from White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. He was speaking to Fox Business. He said stimulus part 2 is coming. Mitch McConnell says the GOP is going to have a new stimulus package next week to present to Republicans in the Senate. What do you think about extended aid? This is more spending.
Oh, I think absolutely they're going to do it. They need to do it. Unemployment's still at, post-depression records, and elections coming up. An interesting question is whether the Democrats and Republicans are so much at each other's throats before the election they can't agree to this. But let me tell you, any incumbent going to the people without having a stimulus package in hand is going to face a very tough electorate. I expect to see something, but I don't know what. They obviously very much disagree on what to do.
I want to bring in my colleague, Kristen, because, Kristen, what's interesting is that you wonder if the average person is really thinking about the fact that we're going so into debt as a country. Obviously, they're just trying to get by day to day. But this is an election year, and it does matter.
So debt is one of those issues that, as I mentioned before with the economy, people tend to think about differently depending on which party is in power. So when Republicans are in control, Republicans don't tend to talk as much about the debt. They don't worry about it as much. But when Democrats are in control, Republicans talk a lot about being worried about how much we're spending. Meanwhile, the shoe is on the other foot. You have Democrats talk a lot more about the need to raise taxes on the wealthy, things like that, ways they believe will raise more revenue during these moments. So the debt is something that everyone should be concerned about. But unfortunately, because it feels like something with consequences so far in the future, people, I think, understandably focus on things that they feel are affecting them right now: healthcare crises, crime, safety, et cetera. And so the debt can sometimes get lost in that conversation.
Ken, do you want to respond to that?
I think that is a terrific point that Kristen made. When the Republicans are in, they want to spend on their priorities, tax cuts, perhaps the military. When the Democrats are in, they want to raise transfers, they want to spend on other things. And you see that in every country in the world, and it's part of the reason debt is rising and rising. There's a bias towards, if you're in power, you spend it. And interest rates are very low right now, but I think it would be a mistake to dismiss this as a free lunch. My concern is not so much what they're doing now, but what are the lessons at the end of this? There is a view that we just have to keep doing this the next 5 years, even as we recover. Oh, gosh. And I think that is very mistaken.
That 5 years is that's a long time. I want to bring in Mark Matson from Matson Money, because Mark, the stock market has been thrilled with all of this stimulus, but there's a dangerous downside to this.
Well, there's a very dark side to this, and I think Nobel Prize winner Eugene Fama says it best, that deficit spending is a form of taxation, and it will eventually drive higher taxation. In addition, it can create inflation, loss of faith in the U.S. government and its debt obligations, and long term, it's very bad. Some of the deficit spending they've been doing is actually encouraging people not to go back to work. Incentives matter. So if you're going to do this at all, it should be based on some kind of a get back to work bonus, or some kind of a holiday on welfare, on taxes or employment taxes. But this is a very dangerous area. We've already done a lot of it. It's got to stop sometime.
Well, and Ken, I want to add to what Mark is saying here, Ken, because Kudlow also said yesterday on Fox Business, he talked about a payroll tax holiday, also a back-to-work bonus, and that there could be reform to unemployment. And I thought that was a key phrase from Kudlow yesterday.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's acknowledgement that the way that the unemployment extra pay was crafted made it difficult for firms to get workers to come back because something like 70% of people earned more being unemployed than employed. Now, there were many good benefits to that and everything, but I think most people think that ought to get recalibrated somehow, and probably they're going to do that.
Sounds like they believe that as well. Kenneth Rogoff, Ken, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.